It's March 20th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with the South Korean government's medical reform. The government is set to announce this afternoon how it will allocate the additional 2,000 medical school admission seats nationwide. Calling such medical reform a call by the people, President Yoon says the reform will happen. North Korea claims to have successfully conducted a ground jet test of a solid-fuel engine for a new type intermediate-range hypersonic missile. The leader, Kim Jong-un, was reportedly at the site directing Tuesday's test. Russian President Vladimir Putin will travel to China in May for talks with Xi Jinping, according to Reuters. The trip will be Putin's first overseas trip of his new presidential term. The South Korean government's pursuit of making the much-discussed medical reform happen is stronger than ever. The plan on how to allot the expanded medical school admissions will be detailed later today. Our An Sung-jin starts us off.
The exact medical school enrollment quota is expected to be announced on Wednesday, further solidifying the government's decision to increase it by 2,000. Emphasizing the need to improve hospitals and small medical schools in the provinces, 80% of the medical school quota, 1,600 students, is expected to be allocated in areas outside the capital area. This will bring the total to 3,623. The biggest beneficiaries are expected to be national medical schools based outside the capital area. The government pledged to enhance them to the level of the so-called Big Five hospitals by also increasing the number of faculty. Meanwhile, the health ministry on Monday sent its first notifications of license suspension to two senior doctors. Bang Myung-ha and Kim Tae-gu are both leaders of an emergency committee at the Korea Medical Association and were given final 3-month suspension notices running from April 15th to July 14th. The ministry said Park and Kim have been supporting the walkout of junior doctors. Park says the walkout was a result of voluntary action by trainee doctors individually and that he will take legal action. Trainee doctors are also preparing to take legal action as they will also start receiving suspension notices from next Monday. Meanwhile, medical school professors from universities including Seoul National University and Yonsei University are set to submit their resignations next Monday. But during a daily briefing on Tuesday, the health ministry asked the professors to persuade junior doctors to return to work.
That is the right thing to do as a doctor and a professor, to make them return to the medical field instead of doing the wrong thing and following the students who irresponsibly left their patients.
The official added that the government is widely open to dialogue, to listening and making policies based on their opinions. However, the Korea Medical Association doubled down on its firm stance by urging the government to apologize for causing this emergency situation. Stating further that once the medical student quota per school is announced, it's passing the point of no return and further destroying South Korea's medical system. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
And President Yoon couldn't emphasize more how vital the reform is, while also noting a special committee will be formed next month for dialogue with doctors. Shin Se-byuk reports.
Calling medical reform the government's duty to the people, President Yoon said in a cabinet meeting on Tuesday that medical licenses should never be used as a tool against the people.
국민의 생명을 살리기 위해 부여된 의사 면허를 국민을 위협하고 불안하게 만드는 수단으로 사용해서는 안 됩니다.
Yoon's remarks came as South Korea now enters the 5th week of a standoff between the government and junior doctors who are protesting against the administration's plan to increase the medical school quota by 2,000 starting in 2025. Yoon also made clear that the government would not back down on its plan. The government clarified that its decision to expand the number of medical school seats was based on the minimum needed to address South Korea's swiftly aging population, grounding its decision in scientific and objective data. Additionally, the president dismissed the medical community's calls for a complete reassessment of the plan. He argued such demands won't garner public support and would hinder healthcare reform efforts.
단계적 접근이나 증원 연기로는 국민의 생명을 살리고 지역과 필수 의료 붕괴를 막는 의료 개혁을 결코 추진할 수 없습니다.
Yoon also addressed the medical community's concerns about a decline in healthcare quality with more doctors. He countered that more professionals would rather foster greater growth and enhance the overall capacity of the healthcare industry. Meanwhile, the formation of a special committee to assess medical reform was also announced at Tuesday's meeting. President Yoon said the committee will launch in April to engage doctors and experts in dialogue as the government pushes for structural improvements in the current delivery system. With the participation of doctors' groups, Yoon said he hopes constructive talks will take place rather than conflict. The president added that he will also address medical reform in his ongoing series of public policy discussions with citizens across the nation. 신세벽, 아리랑 뉴스.
President Yoon Suk-yeol will co-chair a virtual summit of world leaders on Wednesday to discuss reinforcing freedom and democracy for future generations in a rapidly changing world. The leaders' plenary session kicks off at 8 p.m. local time on day 3 of the third Summit for Democracy, which South Korea is hosting. Leaders of South Korea, Kenya, and Denmark will each chair a discussion. Yoon will underscore the need to protect democratic systems and electoral integrity against the threats of fake news and disinformation driven by AI. Kenyan President William Ruto will lead a session on the Global South, and Danish leader Mette Frederiksen on inclusive society and youth empowerment. Arirang News will livecast parts of the conference from 8 p.m. Korea time. So the third Summit for Democracy is taking place here in Seoul with around 300 delegates from around the world, a gathering to shape strategic pathways for future generations. For more, we're joined by Dr. Bruce Bennett this morning. Welcome back.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Bennett, I have to stress that how this is the first time the Summit for Democracy is taking place outside the U.S. Why in Seoul this time?
Well, I think the United States recognizes its critical alliance relationship with South Korea. It wants to promote democracy in South Korea and make South Korea a major leader of the world efforts for democracy. So this is a key effort by the U.S. government to recognize the importance of South Korea as an ally and friend.
Right, and on the sidelines of the summit, the two top diplomats of South Korea and the U.S. reaffirmed their commitment to achieving North Korea's complete denuclearization. Now, why such an emphasis on the regime's complete denuclearization?
Well, in part it is required because the U.S. State Department has been talking about a more incremental approach recently, which is more realistic given that North Korea has just said very clearly it's not going to fully denuclearize. It's just not going to happen. So the State Department is trying to take a practical short-term approach. But the two leaders were anxious to say that doesn't mean that we're going to abandon our eventual objective of North Korean denuclearization.
Definitely. Then other than dealing with North Korea issues, what areas of cooperation do you think personally South Korea and the U.S. can work together to promote, to practice democracy and achieve that freedom that they're talking about?
Well, there are so many areas, whether they're human rights, whether they are security of countries like Ukraine that have been seriously violated. Democracy is hard when you're being attacked. It can also mean making sure that economically that we have free markets available to support our countries and all countries throughout the region. So that means making sure that we have open pathways across the seas for moving cargo and that sort of thing as well. So there's a wide variety of things that can be done by our two countries together.
Definitely. We also have to talk about how Taiwan's digital minister virtually attending a session of the summit, despite Chinese opposition to inviting Chinese officials to the event. Now, Beijing called out Seoul, describing South Korea as Washington's cat's paw. Dr. Bennett, what's your take on this?
Well, we have to remember that China has a very strong policy on Taiwan. They claim that Taiwan is theirs and is not involved in democracy. It's involved in communism. But of course, it's not now. It's a democratic country. And so they want to emphasize their control and their leverage on Taiwan. South Korea properly recognized that Taiwan is a democracy and ought to be involved in the summit of democracy.
Right, and North Korea this morning claimed success in a ground test for its new solid fuel engine for intermediate-range hypersonic missiles. And also on Monday, North Korea launched several short-range ballistic missiles into the East Sea. How do you read the North's recent moves?
Well, North Korea is trying to put tremendous pressure on South Korea and the United States right now to limit our exercises, to discredit the actions of President Yoon and President Biden in cooperation. And so they're trying to make it look like our cooperation is risky, that they are going to retaliate. I think we have to recognize that they're going to test missiles and they're going to do exercises regardless of what we do. And so it's incumbent on us to be prepared to defend ourselves against that kind of imperialistic concept that North Korea has. It wants to control the peninsula. And if we're not prepared to prevent that, we're going to be in a serious world of hurt.
All right, Dr. Bennett, thank you so much for your insight. As always, you enjoy your evening there.
Thank you very much.
North Korea has claimed success in a ground test for a new solid fuel engine for intermediate-range hypersonic missiles. According to the North's state-run media on Wednesday, Pyongyang conducted the test at a launching station near the western coast under the supervision of leader Kim Jong-un. Kim reportedly said the new weapon system is as important as an intercontinental ballistic missile for the North's security and military strategy. Now, hypersonic missiles are designed to travel at more than 5 times the speed of sound and often maneuver at relatively low altitudes, making them harder to detect and intercept. Following his re-election last week, Russian President Vladimir Putin will reportedly make a trip to China, reciprocating his Chinese counterpart who made Moscow the first stop of his new presidential term last year. And eyes are also on whether this could also lead to a potential summit between Russia and North Korea. Our Moon Hae-ryun has the details.
Russian President Vladimir Putin will travel to China for talks with Xi Jinping in May. According to a Reuters report on Tuesday, this could be the first overseas trip of his new presidential term after being re-elected on Sunday. The Kremlin declined to comment, but with Russia strengthening its ties with China since its invasion of Ukraine, it's unsurprising that Putin has made Beijing his first stop. Xi also visited Russia for his first overseas trip following the start of his third consecutive term in March last year, with the reciprocated gesture set to come after Putin's formal inauguration around May 7th. Putin reaffirmed Moscow's close ties with Beijing on Sunday, stating he would continue to develop their relationship in the coming years. The two leaders have met over 40 times, with the most recent meeting in October, when Putin was the guest of honor at China's Belt and Road Summit in Beijing. Trade and military ties between China and Russia have been particularly strong in recent years, with Chinese customs data showing that trade between the two sides hit over $218 billion between January and November last year. The Chinese Foreign Vice Minister also confirmed the strength of bilateral ties by claiming them to be the best in history during a visit to Moscow last month. Attention is also on whether Putin will be visiting North Korea, with observers predicting that such a trip could come in the second half of the year. Following the North Korea-Russia summit in September last year, Pyongyang's foreign minister visited Moscow in January to discuss another potential visit. A Kremlin spokesperson said that Putin's schedule for a visit to North Korea is being coordinated through diplomatic channels, but there were no plans to visit before and immediately after the presidential election. Analysts suspect that Putin is treading carefully amid reports of an arms trade between the two sides that violate UN Security Council resolutions. 문혜련, Arirang News.
Hong Kong's national security law was unanimously passed by its parliament on Tuesday. Now, this means strict measures, including imposing a maximum sentence of life imprisonment for those dissenting against the government. Lee Seung-jae has more.
The Safeguarding National Security Law was unanimously passed by Hong Kong's Legislative Council on Tuesday, expanding the government's power to punish anyone who goes against the state. Article 23 includes new measures on treason, espionage, external interference, state secrets, and sedition. The bill was first presented on March 8th and was quickly put up for vote less than 2 weeks later. The 90-seat council, which consists of mainly pro-China loyalists, saw 88 lawmakers and the council's president vote unanimously to enact the new national security law. The newly passed bill includes 39 security crimes and their punishments. It also means harsher punishments for those who commit those crimes. The maximum penalty is life imprisonment for treason or rebellion and up to 20 years for espionage with the intent to jeopardize national security. Some lesser offenses, including the possession of seditious publications, could also lead to several years in jail. While many citizens are concerned by the passing of the bill, lawmakers believe it will make Hong Kong a safer place.
Whatever comes, it'll come. We don't mind. You can see other countries do everything to protect their national security. And why can't we protect our national security? Okay? Be it downgrade, be it whatever, we don't mind.
Meanwhile, Washington says Hong Kong's new national security law has the potential to accelerate the closing of a once open society as it's analyzing the potential risks to U.S. citizens and American interests.
We believe that these kinds of actions have the potential to accelerate the closing of Hong Kong's once open society. So we're analyzing this legislation and we are taking a look at what the potential risk could be to not just U.S. citizens but other American interests that we might have.
An attempt to pass a version of the national security law in 2003 was met with massive street protests that drew 500,000 people and led to the withdrawal of the legislation. It also comes after similar legislation was introduced in China in 2020, which has largely silenced the pro-democracy protests seen in 2019. The law goes into effect Saturday. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
U.S. semiconductor giant Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang said Tuesday that its company is testing Samsung Electronics' high-bandwidth memory, or HBM. Huang made the remarks during the second day of Nvidia's GTC 2024, an annual AI developers conference hosted by the tech giant. When asked if Nvidia was using the South Korean-made HBM, Huang said they're not currently but are testing it, adding he has high expectations. HBM significantly increased data processing speed by connecting multiple DRAMs vertically. Such high-performance memory is essential for generative AI, which requires rapid and continuous processing of massive data. Meanwhile, SK hynix, which holds more than 90% of the latest fifth-generation HBM market globally, announced it would supply HBMs to Nvidia.
Good morning. I'm Kim Si-young, and now we turn over to stories from around the world. The International Olympic Committee said on Tuesday that Russians and Belarusians will not be taking part in the parade of athletes at the opening ceremony of the Paris 2024 Olympic Games. According to the IOC, the athletes from the two countries will compete without their flags and anthems as a consequence of Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Russians and Belarusians will be competing as individual neutral athletes under a specially created flag and an instrumental anthem with no lyrics produced by the IOC. The IOC said that although the athletes will not be part of the opening parade, they will be invited to experience all other parts of the opening ceremony. It also announced that Russian and Belarusian athletes who qualify for the Paris Games will be vetted by a 3-member IOC panel. 36 Russian and 22 Belarusian athletes are expected to compete at this summer's Olympics. In Bolivia, local authorities have found and seized almost $500 million of cocaine hidden in a shipment of scrap metal. The country's interior minister said on Monday that it is the second largest drug bust in Bolivia's history. Bolivia's Special Force of Fight Against Drug Trafficking found over 7.2 tons of cocaine in 2 trucks at the Pisiga customs on the border with Chile. The narcotics were hidden in scrap metal to be initially exported to Belgium before distribution to the rest of Europe. 3 suspects have been detained for criminal association and drug trafficking. In January, authorities also seized 8.7 tons of cocaine in the largest anti-drug operation in Bolivian history. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime says that Bolivia is the 3rd largest grower of coca, the base plant from which cocaine is produced. The World Meteorological Organization said on Tuesday that all major global climate change indicators broke records in 2023. According to the latest annual State of the Global Climate Report released by the UN's weather agency, average temperatures reached 1.45 degrees Celsius higher than pre-industrial levels, hitting the highest level in 174 years. Oceans are also suffering, with the report showing over 90% of the seas experiencing heatwave conditions, while ocean temperatures reached their warmest in 65 years of data collection. United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres commented on the report, saying that the Earth is issuing a distress call and that the planet is on the brink. A new air quality report suggested that all but one of the 100 cities with the world's worst air pollution last year were in Asia. IQ Air's 6th annual World Air Quality Report, published Tuesday, showed that 83 out of the 100 cities with the worst air in the world were in India. The report, which specifically studied the levels of fine particulate matter, or PM2.5, showed that Begusarai, a city in northern India, was the most polluted last year, suffering from a PM2.5 concentration of almost 120, which is 23 times more than the WHO guidelines. PM2.5 has been linked to asthma, heart and lung disease, and other respiratory conditions, alongside cognitive impairment in children.
Good morning. Well, I'm sure I'm not the only one who thought I should have worn a thicker jacket on the morning commute. Today is the spring equinox, but feels like temperatures this morning are sub-zero in the capital, and it's going to be even colder tomorrow morning. It's easy to catch a cold when the temperature swings like this, so please take care. Meanwhile, snow continues in Gangwon-do and Gyeongsang-Buk-do province with 1 to 5 centimeters in the forecast today. A heavy snow advisory is even in place for Donghae and Samcheok in Gangwon-do, while coastal regions in Jeju remain under a strong wind advisory. Dry advisory stayed in effect for southeast regions. Afternoon highs will be 1 to 5 degrees lower than yesterday, so Seoul gets up to 9 degrees. Daegu topping out at 11 degrees Celsius, but you know that sharp winds will make it feel chillier today. We are looking at a chance of rain late Friday. Then this weekend will be very warm, nearing 20 degrees by Sunday in the capital. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
We thank you for watching New Day at Arirang. We'll be back tomorrow for Thursday's edition at the same time, 9 a.m. Korea time.
하나, 둘, 셋.
Hey, Mr. Cupid, who's mine? Make sure you listen to what I say. I may be stupid or quite naive.
끝없이 쏟아지는 포토스팟. 휴대폰 한 대로 감당할 수 있겠니?
Arrow straight through my heart.
한국에 오면 먹어야죠. 먹어도 끝이 없는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 웰컴. (24시간) 불이 꺼지지 않는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 웰컴. (24시간) 불이 꺼지지 않는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 한국에 오면 먹어야죠. 먹어도 먹어도 끝이 없는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
We're here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new style, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation. Making news just for you. It's March 20th here in Seoul. I'm Yoon, and you're watching News Generation. Joining me in the studio is Cheska Dain-hong.
Happy Wednesday, everyone.
Good morning. And Choi Ji-hee.
Good morning.
Good morning. Now, both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. As usual, let's start with our news feed, which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. Professors at Korea's 5 most prestigious medical schools are also deciding to resign en masse. 2 of them, Seoul National University and Yonsei College of Medicine, have decided to make the first move by handing in their resignations next Monday. In response, the health ministry has asked the professors to stop and even persuade junior doctors to return to work. In an emergency briefing, officials emphasize that the government is open to dialogue and will craft policies based on the opinions of medical personnel. Moving on, Russia's pro-Kremlin telegram channels such as MASH and Redoka had been spreading false information about Britain's royal family. These media outlets with millions of followers alleged the death of King Charles III on Monday. They even added a screenshot with a fake statement attributed to Buckingham Palace as proof. Nonetheless, many people seem to believe it, as conspiracy theories about the royal family had been spreading since several members have not been seen by the public recently. After such news was reposted in Ukraine, though, the British embassy has denied the stories, calling them disinformation. And recently, an online community post in Korea bashing the government's Youth Leap account program went viral. The Youth Leap account is a product that replaces the Youth Hope Savings, also launched by the government to help young people invest safely with comparatively high interest rates. The online post pointed to how the Bitcoin market has recently fluctuated and encouraged younger people to take out their finances from the Youth Leap account and instead be wiser and invest in cryptocurrency. The use of virtual asset exchange apps has soared recently following news of Bitcoin's surge. Mobile Index on Sunday found the number of active users on Upbit, Korea's #1 exchange app, increased by 74.5% in just 5 days. Another app saw a whopping 92.9% growth, but those who came across this post had split opinions. While some took it lightheartedly or even agreed, others said young people should be wise by keeping some of their assets in a safe savings account like the government's Youth Leap account. Some even criticized the person who wrote this post, saying encouraging risky investment will put the whole country's future at risk. Now, here in the studio, you guys read this online community post, and what were your thoughts on it?
Well, I understand that many young people today think that investing in Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies is a fast way of growing their asset and wealth. However, I have a more critical view on this, and I don't think this post should be encouraged and young people should be promoted to really invest in risky investments. We've talked about this before, actually, in one of our previous episodes, and I believe that we should have some money saved in a safe account like the government Youth Leap account. And we've talked about how in our previous episode we said some people, some young people, they have even gone extreme to taking their own lives after losing all their money in risky investments. So we should really be cautious about this, and it shouldn't be encouraged.
Exactly, but I really just hope that our generation is smart enough not to be swayed by a single online community post. As we constantly emphasize here on NewsGen when we talk about investment and finance, it should be based on your own research and your own personal choices. Now, what about you, Cheska? What did you think?
You know, I really agree in terms of there's always a high risk, high return in these stock markets, and people are kind of actively drawn to some of these because they want a quick return on a quick investment. However, I think we do have to be a little bit cautious because, as we have seen in the article today, you know, the youth support system from the federal government is supposed to be a safe deposit for people who want to deposit money, and to take that out in a high risk and high return investment, I think, could be an incredibly risky move. I'm not actively involved in the exchange market, so I'll be very cautious to say yay or nay. But one thing that I would like to add is just because there's a rush does not mean it's a gold mine. And there have been reports that the market has been overvalued because it has been fear-driven and expectation-driven, which was much higher than the reality. I think it's being traded about 9% higher in the domestic market than the foreign exchange due to this factor. So I do hope that everyone makes a very careful and well-evaluated choices before they just rush into something.
Exactly. And I think the center of today's news feed is that our generation is really looking forward for the most wise way to invest, because it really is about how we're living life these days with rising inflation. And officials have been rolling out different programs, like, as we mentioned, the different youth leap accounts and the savings account. And we're going to be talking about that as our main discussion topic of the day. In particular, the city of Seoul has been rolling out various youth support programs recently. These are mainly financial subsidies or cash to help young people combat inflation and high food prices. And we're going to take a look at the different financial policies there are at the moment. And Chi, would you like to walk us through first?
Sure. So there's the Seoul Youth Allowance program, which was first introduced in 2016. It's a program that really aims to support young people who have been unemployed or who are working under a short-term contract. And the program provides each member of this program an allowance of 500,000 won. That's approximately $370 per month for 6 months straight. And it goes to approximately 20,000 young people in the country and in Seoul, the capital area. And the allowance is really intended to support these young people to engage in different activities that will help them to develop their career. And the main requirement for this is that the people who receive the allowance should be living in Seoul, and they should fall below 150% of the median income. And also, they have to be those who are not employed for over 2 years after graduation.
I see.
Yes, and they age from 19 to 34.
And that's how the South Korean government defines what a youth is. Now, would you like to elaborate on any other policies there are?
Sure. There are additional subsidies that are run by the federal government to support youth effort, ranging from rent to job securement. So now let's take a look at the screen to see the actual details of these federal support system. So there are 3 main types. The first is related to employment. Now, in order to mitigate the wage gap between different sectors of jobs, this subsidy funds young people for a period of time for those working in small, medium corporations. And there's also a savings account subsidy for people when they deposit a specific amount for a certain period of time, the government gives them a subsidy. And of course, lastly, the rent support for those who don't own a home. Now, there are additional local government funds that support interviews for jobs and blue-collar bank accounts. And the government has been very active in sort of supporting the youth in terms of providing these financial supports in various areas.
But there seems to be surrounding debates towards it. We always talk about welfare policies and how the best way is to go.
Right.
But rather than just giving out cash subsidies, some people think that there needs to be better support in infrastructure. There's so many different surrounding arguments. So would you like to walk us through on what some of them are?
Sure. You know, as with these kind of youth supports, it is extremely helpful for people because, as we have discussed, you know, I think it's always helpful to have something to kickstart as youth do not have any fundamentals or foundations. However, there have been some concerns about, you know, people who are actually abusing the system because it's a cash equivalent subsidies. So there have been articles that came out, for instance, using the cash for their own luxury dining experience and not really devoting or investing and actually actively seeking employment. Now, as of 2023, there are about 50,000 young unemployed in Seoul, and there have been debates and concerns about whether they are voluntarily taking their time off and basking in the cash subsidies. So I guess on one end, some argue that perhaps a more hands-on approach and maybe perhaps a more, you know, on-hands training or employment counseling might be much more beneficial for these type of people.
Exactly, because I do believe it'd be very difficult for officials to track down one-on-one whether the cash subsidy is being used in the right way, right? Any other surrounding arguments?
Well, there may be some people who oppose giving actual money to help these young people, but then receiving cash assistance can actually be be very beneficial in many cases because often young people may struggle to find a job while also struggling to pay the expenses for their rent or tuition and other education costs. And this can be very discouraging for these people, especially when the available jobs tend to be very insecure and often short-term as well. So some people believe that providing immediate financial support, such as these allowances, could be more helpful since it would enable young adults to really concentrate solely on developing their career. And in fact, financial insecurity is the biggest or the most significant contributor to the insecurity that young people these days feel.
Absolutely.
So helping them with cash assistance is definitely the quickest way and the most straightforward way too, as long as they're used in the intended manner responsibly.
You said it perfectly. I do think there needs to be a condition. I understand that it could be the most effective and quick remedy, and I feel that some people who actually use it for what the government is intending to do might feel like it's a bit unfair if they start taking it back just because a minority are exploiting it. But I do think that there needs to be a condition that it's not being exploited. And we asked our viewers what they think about government officials rolling out financial support programs for struggling young people out there. Take a look at the screen to find out what 3 of them had to share with us. Swordkeepsy said, in France, a significant amount of students regularly go to food distribution, so I'd say yes, if it's necessary. It also gives more independence to the youth from their relatives, which can be very helpful depending on the situation. Leon Dio said, cash assistance can provide immediate financial stability for young adults who are facing economic hardships and helps cover basic needs. However, there is a risk of creating dependency on cash assistance, potentially discouraging self-reliance. Jiaoyi said, I definitely think cash assistance is necessary for young adults so that they don't get pressured into undesirable employment. But these young adults must also be actively seeking work. I think schools should teach commerce to students at a young age so they can hopefully be well off financially when they grow up. And I think these are all very legitimate and constructive feedback from our viewers. And to find out more on whether there are similar programs abroad, we're going to include a social welfare expert from the States. Stay tuned for our live interview. We're now going to turn to Mary Collins, a professor of social welfare policy from Boston University. Welcome, Professor Collins.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, so we've been talking about how Seoul City has been rolling out different cash subsidy programs for youth out there. But are there any similar subsidy programs in Boston helping young people like there here in Seoul?
Yeah, I would say very little. So I really enjoyed listening to your program and learning about this cash subsidy efforts in Seoul. I would say that there is not such a thing in Boston, nor throughout the United States that I'm aware of. The closest thing that I would think about is sometimes young people who had been in foster care and who have aged out of the system, particularly after COVID or in the COVID years. There was some effort to provide some financial support because they were quite struggling. But even that has been somewhat turned off in more recent times. It is a policy idea that I believe is discussed around here and that many people would be supportive of for many of the reasons that you just pointed out. So it's definitely something that I would be in favor of. I think a lot of advocates working with young adults would be in favor of, not just for young people aging out of care, but for a whole larger population of young people with economic struggles.
You know, it's really interesting that you compared it with Boston. Here in the studio, as you've heard, there have been some debates as to the effectiveness of these cash-based subsidies. What do you think, what's your opinion on these cash-based subsidies, and do you think they will actually create tangible results if it were to be implemented?
Yeah, I do think so. There, as I said, there have been some minor efforts to do this with young people leaving care, and more broadly, some universal basic income programs in different parts of the United States. They have so far tended to be small. My understanding of some of the evidence that's come out of these programs is, as some of you had said, that the young people are using the the financial assistance quite wisely, and that there have been some good outcomes attached to it. One can imagine how difficult it is to get a foothold in adulthood and successful adulthood if you are constantly scrambling to find a place to live, to take any kind of job that comes along. So it's very hard to plan for a more stable future. So as I said, some of the evidence is suggesting that people use these funds for housing, for investment in education, for basic needs, and that takes care of some of the worries that would keep them from moving forward and attaining some goals. I think the other thing I'd say is the young adult years are really crucial and important for helping young people get on a good life trajectory. And particularly in Boston, but many of our large cities in the United States, if you don't have a good, decent paying job, you cannot get housing, you cannot get higher education. So we would be consigning a whole lot of people to a life of poverty if we don't provide some assistance in these early adult years.
I see. And Jihi, would you like to ask the last question?
Sure. So thank you for your insight. Then other than these measures that we have in the country or anywhere else, including the United States, what are some other measures that we need to consider to really boost the well-being of the young people?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. So a variety of investments, certainly not waiting until the young adult years, but also the earlier years of life, helping young people remain connected to their community. So all the other extra fun, recreational, and civic opportunities that they might have, making sure that we provide opportunity for young people to have voice. One of the good things also about these financial assistance type of programs is that they can empower young people to make decisions for themselves, which is, again, going to have some payoff in the long term. So any of the kind of programs that help develop those skills in young people is another way, a supplemental way we can support them in their goals.
And Professor Collins, before I let you go, I would like to ask one more question. Is there any representative policy in Boston or anywhere else in the States at the moment that South Korea can blueprint off of to boost better youth welfare?
Yeah, it's an exciting time. And so I think there are a lot of ideas and good ideas that are floating around in the policy landscape to help this population. So a variety of things along the lines of universal basic income, which is broader than young adults, but could be inclusive of young adults. And the idea of, and I know it's risky, and you've already raised some of these concerns about the kind of no strings attached cash assistance, but it does get to the problem very quickly and efficiently. And the more that we put in conditions, rules, eligibility criteria, it just leads to a lot more administrative infrastructure that can make it very difficult to access. So while there might be some slippage and some people who don't use the funding as wisely as we'd like them to, some of the evidence suggests that's a pretty small percentage and kind of not worth the problem of adding in a whole bunch of other rules and complications to it.
I see. Thank you so much, Professor Collins. It was a pleasure talking to you today.
Likewise. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. All right, and I'd like to end off today's discussion by asking you two young people who are currently living in Seoul whether you've ever enjoyed any of the government subsidy programs out there.
Well, during the COVID-19 period, the government rolled out the freelancer support program as well. And I'm a freelancer, and I believe, Cheska, you're also a freelancer. We're not part of any company. We're not hired anywhere. And so I received that financial support for, I think, 5 times.
Wow.
And the requirement was just to provide documents that would prove that my income has been reduced by a certain percentage. And so I used the 2 extreme examples to make sure that I definitely fell into that requirement and received some freelancer support.
And did it help you?
It helped me.
And what about you, Cheska, as a freelancer? Were you you also aware of this?
I absolutely did. And I just wanted to add what the professor said. Having that subsidy during a very difficult time did give me the emotional and also the physical stability that I wasn't getting during those times, because not only because I was a freelancer, but as she mentioned, it's very hard to do quote-unquote adulting when the basic needs and necessities are at risk. So having those subsidies and having those taken care of, I was actually able to focus on, starting my other projects to start my additional income and also pay my rent, which was a huge thing. So I think those subsidies definitely helped me also.
And it was quite fascinating and a little bit prideful for me as a Korean to find out that compared to the United States, our welfare programs are really trying to give that immediate remedy. But still, I do think that as young adults living in one of the most high housing priced capitals in the world, Seoul, there still needs to be a little bit more subsidy programs out there.
I think we can use a little bit more.
A little bit more. We're just asking for a little bit more, but what would that be?
Well, that would include many others. And I just wanted to add to what Cheska just said about how it provided emotional and actual physical support during the difficult times. And I also think it helped me a lot. But I wish I knew about this program or when I was studying as a graduate student, because like I mentioned earlier, many students struggle to make their ends meet before trying to study or develop their career. And I was one of those students because I had to do part-time jobs to pay my rent and also try to study at the same time, but I couldn't solely focus on studying. So I wish there could be support programs for graduate school students as well, not just those who are unemployed.
I see.
Yes.
Those who are studying, and also maybe better promotion, because sometimes
they don't know.
You don't know, and if you had access to that information, that could take you leaps and bounds. What about you, Cheska? As an ending note, what type of support policies would you like to see even more come forward?
As a professor mentioned, the people that misuse it is only a very small portion. So I do hope that the cash subsidies still increase for people like us and the younger people that do need support. But also on top of that, I was also wondering, because I have a lot of entrepreneur friends who have benefited a lot from the youth venture programs or support system, that perhaps we could also add maybe like a one-to-one mentoring system or sometimes a support system that can actually see through to see concrete results, so that both the people that are providing it and the people receiving it can actually see that, oh, this actually has an end result that is very positive and it has an outcome.
And I think we are going in the right direction, because as you guys have demands as well, the president is currently holding policy discussions with the public to hear what they need. But I do think that everything needs to be kept into consideration, whether the promotion is being done in place, whether there's no room for exploitation. Monitoring. We need to see better education and raising awareness, and hopefully today's episode shed light to that. Now, in the meantime, we'll be here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks to Cheska Dain-hong.
Pleasure's always mine. Thank you.
And Choi Ji-hee.
Thank you.
All right, and thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We are News Generation.
한국에 오면 먹어야죠.